The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs, painting the land with a soft gold glow. The wind moved across the dry plains, carrying the faint smell of dust and grass. Ethan Cole rode slowly, his horse's hooves making dull sounds on the hard ground. He was a quiet man who spoke little and thought much. The days had grown tense around the ranches and the tribal lands. Cattle had gone missing, fences were cut, and angry men were talking too loudly in saloons. Someone needed to speak before things went too far. Ethan volunteered to go, not because he was fearless, but because he hated the idea of more sorrow in the valley. He had been a scout once, during rough years when peace was rare. Now he just wanted quiet days and open skies. The flag of truce tied to his saddle fluttered gently as the breeze shifted. His heart wasn't racing, but he felt that still kind of worry that stays deep in the chest. The canyon ahead looked narrow and silent. He had been told that the meeting would happen by the river, near a place where white rocks formed a natural bridge. He hoped the word had reached the right people. Out here, a misunderstanding could last a lifetime. As he turned around the bend, he saw her. She stood alone on a flat rock near the river, her posture tall and calm. She wasn't holding a gun like many would have expected. Instead, she carried a long spear made of smooth wood with silver threads tied near the top. Her dark hair was braided and beads glimmered as the evening light touched them. She looked younger than he had imagined, maybe 20, maybe a little more, but her eyes were older. They held something steady, something that had seen both hope and loss. Ethan slowed his horse and raised one hand, showing that he meant no harm. He dismounted carefully and walked forward. The river whispered softly behind her, clear and slow, as if time itself had paused to listen. The woman watched him without moving. Her expression was calm, but her eyes missed nothing. She said her name was Lona. Her voice was soft but firm, and each word carried pride. She told him she spoke for her people now that her father, the old chief, could no longer walk far from camp. Ethan nodded. He said he came to talk, not to argue. He told her that both sides were losing sleep over the same fears. Losing land, losing peace, losing family. Lona listened quietly, not showing what she felt. The land had seen too many broken promises, and she had learned not to trust words easily. Her people had been pushed back, their hunting grounds shrinking each season. Still, there was something different in the way Ethan spoke. He didn't sound like a man sent by greedy ranchers. He sounded tired, sincere, and maybe a little sad. When he said, "I came alone," her eyes flickered in surprise. It was rare for anyone to come alone into their lands. He added softly, "I don't expect trust. Only a chance to speak before others make things worse." The air between them grew still. The sound of the river filled the silence again. She lowered her spear slightly, not as surrender, but as a sign that she was listening now. They stood there for a while, two people from worlds that rarely met as equals. The setting sun painted their faces in amber light. Lona asked why a man like him would risk his life for peace. Ethan gave a half smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Because someone has to," he said. "If not me, maybe no one." For a moment her face softened. She had heard many speak of peace, but few had the calm courage to walk alone into the unknown for it. She turned toward the canyon, motioning for him to follow. "The elders wait deeper in the valley," she said quietly. "They will hear you." Her tone carried authority, but something in her voice sounded uneasy. Ethan caught it, though he didn't speak of it. He adjusted his hat and followed her down the narrow path. The air cooled as the sun dipped lower. The walls of the canyon rose around them like tall red guards, shutting out the rest of the world. The horse followed behind, its reins dragging softly along the stones. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. The air smelled faintly of sage and smoke, but no campfires burned nearby. No one spoke. Only the sound of their steps echoed off the rocks. Ethan noticed the silence more and more. No birds, no movement, no sign of life beyond them. His instincts whispered something he didn't want to hear. Years of scouting had taught him that quiet can be a warning. Lona walked ahead with her spear resting against her shoulder. The light played along her hair, the beads shining like tiny sparks. She moved gracefully, but her steps had become slower, as if something weighed on her. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You seem troubled," he said. "Did I come at a bad time?" She didn't answer at first. Her hand tightened slightly around her spear. Then she said, almost to herself, "There is never a good time for peace." Only a choice. He didn't know what to say to that. She was right, and they both knew it. The canyon curved sharply and the path narrowed again. The air felt heavier now. The shadows stretched long across the ground, hiding the stones. Ethan glanced upward and saw the tall ridges above them. Something stirred in him, an old sense of danger, the kind that doesn't shout, only whispers. He thought he saw movement high above, but when he looked again, there was nothing. When they reached a small clearing between the rocks, Lona stopped. She stood still for a long moment, her back to him. Ethan waited, feeling the stillness settle deep around them. The sky had turned red and purple now, and the first stars were faint in the east. Finally, she turned to face him. Her face was unreadable, her eyes darker now that the light had faded. She said quietly, "They told me to bring you here." Ethan didn't move. "Who?" he asked, though he already felt the answer forming like a cold wind in his mind. She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "The warriors," she said. "They wanted you here before nightfall." His chest grew tight. Not from fear, but from the feeling of being caught in something he didn't understand yet. He looked around again, his gaze sweeping the ridges. Still no sound, no sign of life. Only the river murmuring behind them. Lona took a step closer, her voice softer now. "I didn't know what they planned," she whispered. "They said it was only a talk. They said no harm would come." Ethan watched her face, the way her eyes flickered between regret and pride, between what she was told and what she believed. He nodded slowly. "You did what you thought was right," he said gently. "So did I." The wind moved through the canyon again, carrying dry leaves that rustled softly across the stones. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan felt the weight of every choice he had made to come here. He could have stayed home, could have ignored the trouble, but he hadn't, and now standing in this lonely place, facing a woman who looked torn between duty and truth, he understood something deeper. Peace was never simple, never clean. It always cost someone more than it should. Lona's fingers trembled as she tightened her grip on the spear. "You should go," she said quietly. "Now." He looked at her carefully, his voice calm. "Will they let me?" She didn't answer. The silence that followed was answer enough. Ethan took a slow step back, his boots crunching lightly on the stones. The canyon walls glowed faintly as the last sunlight faded. He didn't know what waited beyond the next turn, but he knew the moment he left this spot, everything could change, for her, for him, for everyone on both sides of the valley. She met his gaze one last time. Her eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow and courage mixed together. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "remember I tried." And before he could speak again, she turned away toward the shadows, her braids swaying softly in the wind. Ethan stood alone beside the river, the truce flag still tied to his saddle. The sky above darkened to indigo, and somewhere far off, a single coyote cried into the night. He didn't yet know what kind of trap he had walked into, or that the woman who led him there would become the one to save him from it. Ethan stayed still for a long time, listening to the soft wind move through the canyon. The air felt heavier now, as if the rocks themselves were waiting. The light had faded to deep blue, and only the moon began to shine faintly above the ridges. He could sense eyes watching him, though he saw no one. His horse shifted uneasily, its ears twitching toward the darkness. Somewhere beyond the narrow bend there was a faint rustle, a whisper of movement that didn't belong to the wind. He took a slow breath, trying to calm both himself and the animal. He had been in places like this before, where one wrong word or one wrong step could change everything. He had learned that the best way to face fear was not with anger, but with stillness. A voice broke the silence, soft, uncertain. "Ethan," Lona said from behind the rocks. She stepped into the dim light, her face half hidden by shadow. "You should go now. The men are close. They think you came to spy." He looked at her calmly, even as his heart beat faster. "And what do you think?" he asked. Lona hesitated. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "I think you came because you meant what you said, that you want peace." Her tone was low, almost sad. "But they don't believe words anymore." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. Out here, trust was fragile. He glanced at the cliffs again, then back at her. "If I leave now," he said, "will they follow me?" She didn't reply right away. "If they see you go without speaking," she said softly, "they might think you ran in guilt. If you stay, they may think you're trying to trick them, He gave a small smile that didn't hide his worry. Then I suppose either way I'm in trouble. Something flickered across her face, maybe concern, maybe admiration. You're not like the others, she said quietly. Most men would have turned back when they saw the canyon. Most men haven't seen what happens when people stop listening, he said gently. For a moment, they stood there, the silence stretching between them like a fragile bridge. Then came the faint sound of footsteps from above. Shadows moved along the ridge, several figures walking slowly, their outlines barely visible against the stars. Lona turned sharply, her voice tight with unease. They're here. Ethan didn't move. Then let them come, he said quietly. I won't lift a hand. The first man to appear was older, his shoulders broad and his hair tied back. His face carried the lines of years spent under the sun. He stopped a few steps away, studying Ethan with sharp eyes. Others followed, forming a half-circle behind him. The air grew colder with their silence. Lona spoke quickly in her own language, her tone firm and pleading. Ethan couldn't understand her words, but he could feel their weight. She was trying to explain, to calm, to bridge the space between fear and reason. Her voice rose and fell like a song carried by the wind. The older man listened but didn't reply right away. He stepped closer to Ethan and looked him over carefully. The man's eyes were not cruel, only wary. Ethan met his gaze without flinching. I came alone, he said softly. With open hands, Lona translated. The older man's expression changed slightly. Less anger now, more thought. Still, he spoke something low and serious to her. She turned back to Ethan. He says your people took 3 horses from their valley. He says you bring peace in words, but not in deeds. Ethan sighed quietly. Tell him the horses weren't mine. Tell him I came here because I believe we can still make this right. Lona repeated his words carefully, her voice clear in the night air. The men listened. One of them shook his head and said something sharp. Lona's face tensed as she answered. The air between them was full of things that couldn't be said easily. Finally, the older man looked at Ethan again and pointed toward the way he came. He spoke one short sentence. Lona turned and said softly, He says you should go before dawn. He doesn't want blood in this canyon. Ethan gave a quiet nod. Then I'll go. He turned to fetch his horse, but before he could mount, Lona stepped closer. Wait, she said gently. Her voice carried a mix of worry and guilt. I didn't know they would meet you like this. I thought, maybe we could change something. He looked at her kindly. You already did, he said. You made them listen. She shook her head. Not enough, he smiled faintly. It's a start. The older man said something again and Lona answered softly. The tension in the air began to fade. The men slowly lowered their weapons and stepped back, watching in silence as Ethan mounted his horse. The night was still, but no longer heavy with threat, only quiet with unspoken understanding. Before he left, Lona reached up and tied a small white cloth to the strap of his saddle. It means safe passage, she said. They won't follow you now. Ethan looked down at her. The moonlight touched her face, and for the first time, he saw a trace of warmth in her eyes. Thank you, he said softly. She nodded. When the moon changes, come again. Maybe they will listen then, he hesitated. Will you be here? I will, she said. Someone has to speak for peace. For a long moment, neither of them spoke again. The canyon felt different now, calmer, almost gentle. The river still moved quietly beside them, its silver surface reflecting the starlight. Ethan turned his horse slowly toward the trail home. He rode carefully, listening to the sounds of the night. Each hoofbeat felt like a promise, a quiet vow that he would return, not to fight but to build trust. The world behind him seemed to breathe easier as he left, the eyes watching from the rocks fading into the shadows. When he reached the open plain again, he stopped and looked back. Far away at the edge of the canyon, he saw a faint figure still standing on the rocks, tall, still, and shining in the moonlight. He knew it was her. He raised his hat slightly in silent thanks, though he doubted she could see it from that distance. Then he turned toward the horizon, where the stars met the dark line of the land. The ride back was long but peaceful. The night air was cool, and the sky above him was wide and endless. He thought about Lona's words, about her courage, about the strange quiet bond that had formed between them in the middle of fear. She had led him into danger but also out of it, guided by something stronger than suspicion or pride. When he finally reached his ranch, the first light of morning was breaking. The land looked softer in the dawn. touched by gentle colors. He tied his horse, washed the dust from his face, and stood for a while watching the sky. He felt tired, but not defeated. A few days later, his neighbors noticed something unusual near the border fence. Someone had tied a small white cloth there, fluttering in the wind. None of the ranch hands knew what it meant, but Ethan did. It was the same sign Lona had given him, a symbol of peace. Word spread quietly across the valley that no cattle were missing anymore, no arrows had been seen near the river, and the nights were calm again. Nobody knew how or why the tension had eased, but Ethan understood. Sometimes peace doesn't come from power or law. It comes from two people brave enough to stand in the middle of fear and choose understanding instead. Months later, when spring came and the river ran fuller, Ethan rode back toward the canyon. The air smelled of wildflowers now instead of dust. The rocks were warm under the sun. He reached the same clearing where they had met before, and this time he wasn't alone for long. Lona stepped out from between the tall grasses, her braids shining in the light. She smiled, a quiet, real smile, and he smiled back. No words were needed. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peace. And though the land around them would still see storms and struggles in the years to come, that one quiet meeting between a cowboy and a warrior became the story people remembered, not for the danger it carried, but for the courage it took to face it without hate. For Ethan, it was a memory that stayed with him every time he looked toward the red cliffs. For Lona, it was proof that even in a world divided by fear, kindness could still change a heart. And for the valley itself, it was the beginning of calm after too many restless years. The wind carried their story softly through the grass, not as a legend but as something true, born from courage, patience, and the will to listen.